Welcome to the very first episode of Ambassel Podcast, where we celebrate and explore the timeless soundscapes of Ethiopia's musical history. I'm excited to take you on a journey through the rhythms, melodies, and stories that have shaped Ethiopian music. In this debut episode, we'll be focusing on what many consider the golden age of Ethiopian music, a period marked by innovation, cultural fusion, and the birth of a sound that continues to inspire both at home and around the world. We'll explore the roots of this era, how it came to be, and why its legacy still echoes in the music we hear today. Before we begin today's podcast, let's take a moment to understand the rich musical landscape we're about to explore. In the mid-20th century, Ethiopia stood at the crossroads of tradition and modernization. A country steeped in ancient history was undergoing rapid change, and nowhere was this more evident than in its music. In the 1960s, Ethiopia experienced a musical renaissance. Deeply rooted in the country's traditional sounds, Ethiopian musicians began to craft a style that was uniquely their own. This era, later known as the Golden Age of Ethiopian music, became a period of intense creativity and cultural pride, reflecting the hopes, struggles, and identity of a nation. The music of this time carried the soul of Ethiopia. Hypnotic melodies, complex rhythms, and an unmistakable depth of emotion that spoke to generations. Though the political and social backdrop was often turbulent, the music remained a unifying force of voice for the people. Today, we'll begin to explore that world, unlocking the stories behind the sound and the era that gave birth to an unforgettable musical legacy. Stay tuned.
I was in an Ethiopian restaurant and they were playing this incredible music, and I asked the owner who it was.
The nightlife was great. People were going out basically, 7 nights a week.
There was James Brown in there. There was like this heavy driving funk beats.
I was just blown away by how beautiful the music was, and it just turned me on completely.
Was in a cab, a taxi in Washington, and I said, "What is this? What is this?"
All right, so get ready to move your feet because we're diving deep into Ethiopia's golden age of music.
Yeah, the 60s and 70s. You've brought a really cool mix of articles and blog posts about this time. And believe me, this is not your typical history lesson. Okay, so picture this. Addis Ababa in the 60s. The city's buzzing with nightlife. Kind of rivals any international city you can think of. Nightclubs are packed. And they're bursting with the sounds of Ethiopian singers and musicians, blending traditional sounds, like that rhythmic shoulder movement of Eskista dancing, with global influences, American R&B, funk,
Yes.
you name it.
And it's that fusion, that mix of cultures, that created something really unique. Ethiopia has this incredibly rich musical history, and part of that is because it's one of the few African nations that was never colonized.
So they were coming from a totally different musical perspective then. Exactly. While other parts of Africa were picking up Cuban and Latin rhythms from colonization, Ethiopian musicians were drawing inspiration from their own ancient traditions. And surprisingly, from Black American music that was making waves across the Atlantic.
That's fascinating. It's like they created this musical melting pot.
Precisely. And you can't talk about music in Ethiopia at this time without talking about the emperor himself, Haile Selassie. He wasn't just inspiring reggae anthems, he seriously loved music. And he had some interesting tastes.
Okay, so this is where things get even more interesting. I know Selassie and reggae are like super connected. You're saying he had a different musical passion.
He did. While Selassie appreciated different kinds of music, he really loved military brass bands. To him, they represented power, prestige, and national pride.
That's definitely different from Bob Marley. So, how did this love for brass bands actually play out in Ethiopian music? Did it affect more than just the instruments they used.
Oh, it went way beyond just the instruments. Selassie's government really pushed for incorporating brass into Ethiopian music, even traditional music. It was a way to modernize their sound, but still keep that Ethiopian identity. And this leads us to another important part of the story, the government's role in shaping the music of this golden age.
Okay, let's talk about that. We've got this emperor who loves brass bands, and a government that seems pretty into the music scene. What's the story there?
Well, during this time, the Ethiopian government under Selassie, they had a lot of control over the music industry. The most talented musicians usually ended up in state-sponsored bands, like the Police Band, the Haile Selassie Theater Band, and the really prestigious Imperial Bodyguard Band.
Wow, so getting a gig with one of those state-sponsored bands, that must have been huge for musicians back then. Talk about job security. What was it like for them?
It was kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, it gave them stability and a way to get exposure, steady salaries, performing at big government events, even playing at fancy hotel dances. It was a chance to really improve their skills, playing alongside the best musicians in Ethiopia.
I can only imagine the pressure of playing for important people and government officials. But I bet it came with a lot of prestige, too.
Oh, for sure. But there were downsides. These musicians were kind of stuck with the government's vision for Ethiopian music. And this is where things get really interesting. Because while these bands provided structure, it was the independent artists, the ones who pushed boundaries, who really defined this golden age.
It makes you wonder if that kind of control helped creativity or hurt it.
Right. It's interesting. The government had their own ideas about the music, but this was also a time when artists were blending traditional sounds with Western influences in these totally new ways.
Right.
Like Mahmoud Ahmed. He's considered one of the most iconic voices of this whole era.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him. His voice is amazing.
It really is. People have actually described it as a great mysterious horn. Like they compare it to American soul legends like Otis Redding. His style often used the pentatonic scale, which is common in both Ethiopian music and American blues. So there's this soulful quality that connects with people from all different backgrounds. And get this, his music actually caught the ear of a French producer, and that producer ended up playing a huge role in bringing this golden age sound to the world.
Wow, no way. It sounds like we'll be hearing more about that story later. But for now, tell me more about these artists who are mixing genres and making something new. What made them so special?
Well, let's take Alamahu Ashed. He was called the Ethiopian James Brown for a reason.
I bet that nickname didn't come easy.
Yeah.
What made him so similar to James Brown?
Ashed brought this raw energy to the stage. He used elements of funk and soul, like syncopated rhythms and powerful vocals. But what made him truly unique was his ability to blend those Western influences with traditional Ethiopian music. He wasn't just copying James Brown, he was creating his own path, a sound that was both familiar and completely new.
It's like they were taking these outside ideas and making them their own. What about other artists from this time? Who else should we know about?
Well, there's Tewel Reda, a real trailblazer. He played an amplified krar. The krar is this traditional Ethiopian lyre. It's a beautiful instrument, kind of a harp-like sound. But Reda took it to another level. He amplified it and created this rich, resonant sound. It blended perfectly with traditional and modern music.
I love that. Taking something traditional and giving it a modern twist, it really shows the creativity of the time. But we can't forget about the artists who are pushing boundaries in different ways. You mentioned earlier that the government had a lot of power over the music scene with those state-sponsored bands. Was everyone cool with that?
Not exactly. And this is where Amha Ashed comes in. He wasn't a musician himself, but Amha Ashed was a visionary in his own way.
Okay, another Ashed. Any relation to Alamahu?
Not that we know of. But Amha Ashed was really important in creating a more independent scene. When he was only 26, he did something really bold. He challenged the way things were and started Ethiopia's first independent record label, Amha Records.
Wow, that's a big deal, especially with the government controlling so much of the music industry. What was his vision for Amha Records? What was he trying to do differently?
Amha Ashed saw a chance to support artists who wanted more control over their music. Remember how we talked about the limitations of those state-sponsored bands? Amha Records offered another option, a way for musicians to record and release their music on their own terms.
That's so important, giving artists control and ownership over their work. What kind of impact did it have? Did Amha Records become a place for artists who wanted more creative freedom?
Definitely. The label got known really quickly for having a diverse mix of artists and for always pushing boundaries. It wasn't just about avoiding government control, it was about building a community, a place where musicians could experiment, work together. and explore new sounds without limits.
That's incredible. It's like he built this space where creativity could thrive. This Amha Eshet sounds like a true visionary. But you mentioned a French producer who came across Mahmoud Ahmed's music earlier. How does he fit into all of this?
That's where the story takes an interesting turn. You probably guessed it from our conversation about Mahmoud Ahmed. His name is Francis Falcetto. He had this incredible passion for music. He was always searching for hidden gems and forgotten sounds.
He was like a musical Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Discovering these lost recordings.
Exactly. So in the early 1980s, he was working as a music promoter in France, and he found this record by, you guessed it, Mahmoud Ahmed. And the music just blew him away. He'd never heard anything like it.
I can imagine. It must have been like finding a hidden world of music. What did he do?
Well, Falcetto knew he had to share this music, so he tracked down Mahmoud Ahmed, went to Ethiopia, and eventually got Ahmed's album Air Mela Mela released in Europe. But that was just the start.
So it all began with one album, one dedicated producer, and one incredibly talented Ethiopian singer.
Exactly. But Falcetto realized there was so much more to discover. He dove headfirst into the Ethiopian music scene. He went back to Ethiopia over and over again for years, finding old recordings, meeting musicians, really immersing himself in that golden age sound.
Wow, that dedication. This guy was on a mission. So did he manage to bring more of this music to the world?
He did. In the early 1990s, Falcetto launched the Ethiopics compilation series, and these albums became super popular internationally. They introduced the world to all these amazing sounds from Ethiopia's golden age. Artists like Mahmoud Ahmed, Alamayu Eshete, Getachew Mikuria, and many more.
Oh yeah, I've heard of those compilations. They're legendary. It's incredible to think that music that was once stuck in nightclubs and government events in Addis Ababa was suddenly being enjoyed by people all over the planet.
Right. It just shows you how powerful music can be. It crosses borders, connects people from different cultures. But what's even cooler is the impact Ethiopics had back in Ethiopia.
I was just going to ask about that. It's one thing for the music to get global recognition, but did it connect with younger generations in Ethiopia?
Absolutely. Ethiopics created this whole new wave of interest in that golden age sound. Imagine young Ethiopian musicians hearing their musical heritage, maybe for the first time. Through these compilations, it sparked this creative explosion, this urge to explore and reinterpret the music of their parents' generation.
It's like this music went on this incredible journey through time, across continents, and then back home with a whole new energy.
Exactly. And here's the thing. This rediscovery wasn't about nostalgia. It wasn't just copying the past. It was about fusing those classic Ethiopian rhythms and melodies with modern influences, bringing new life to a timeless sound.
That's what I love about music. It's alive. It evolves with every generation.
Couldn't agree more. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. It's about cultural exchange, artistic innovation, and the enduring power of music to connect generations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with this amazing image of Addis Ababa in the 60s and 70s, a melting pot of musical influences, where artists took tradition and innovation and created something truly special. It reminds us that music can transport us through time, across cultures. It can open our ears to new sounds and connect us with something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe it'll even inspire us to go out and find our own hidden musical gems.